So, one of the other things that it talks about in this paragraph about the ego is that it operates according to the reality principle, right? And then, you know, we have come to understand what the reality principle is, right? And that's a whole nother discussion that I'm not going to delve into today, but we know that once again that the id being irrational and operating off of a fantasy driven principled way of living are kind of totally opposite. So again, going back to that jihad, that holy war that goes on inside is always like this. You're constantly butting heads with yourself. Hence the reason why when you come into contact with someone who you begin to identify with, right, you'll find that the similarities have more to do with the id than anything else. Have more to do with the id than anything else. And I'll let you figure that one out, but I'll continue with the description of the ego, but I want you to take and marinate on that one for a minute or so, or a day, or a week, a month, a year. Because it's real important to understand why we gravitate towards some people and why we move away from some people, right? Working out realistic ways of satisfying the id's demands, often compromising or postponing. And then this is again here where the balance has to come in, because sometimes one can compromise or postpone satisfaction and then deprive itself of its own needs. And that's why sometimes you'll hear people say how I lost myself in this relationship. Because sometimes you can often compromise and delay things for but so long that what it does, it reinforces that behavior within you. And you find yourself always compromising. You find yourself always postponing. And then people will turn around and say to you, well, you shouldn't have given all of yourself into that person like that. How foolish that is. But you have to also look at how foolish that person felt as well. You know, especially if the relationship ended. Right? You have to look at that as well. But when you look at how compromise is an intricate part of relationship building, right? That there's also a balance there that has to happen. Sometimes when you have situations where compromise is somewhat absent in the interaction, whether it be with husband and wife, boyfriend and girlfriend, whether it be in the workplace, whether it be a team sport, something, when there's no compromise that's coming, that's reciprocated, right? That's when you have to take a look at that and be careful, because you can find yourself being conditioned to be a doormat. You can find yourself being conditioned to be a doormat. Then you start finding yourself in multiple situations where you're always the doormat, but you're always blaming the other person for using you as a doormat, when you don't look at the fact that you made yourself a doormat by reinforcing within your own self, that behavior of always compromising, of always putting off things you do for yourself to satisfy the id of others. Because that happens, and it happens often. So there has to be a balance. There has to be a balance with that, right? Because even though that's the role of the ego, operant conditioning is another piece to it too, right? Every time that person cries, right, you're conditioned to postpone or delay. You're conditioned to compromise in the circumstance, right? That's what happens, right? So something happens in order for you to believe that there's a need to compromise, to postpone, to yield to that other situation. Something happens within you. That's an operant conditioning. So tears, operant condition, is that when tears happen, I do this. When anger happens, I do this. So sometimes when you need to speak to certain things, you don't. You postpone it. Because now's not the time. But not looking at that other person's condition. Not looking at the condition of the circumstance. The circumstance is as it is. Whatever the circumstance is, understand that a person is in the circumstance, that circumstance as a person by willfulness. Because there's a choice, there's a decision that has to be made. There's a choice. If it's an abusive situation, what's the choice? Either you stay or you go. You can't within yourselves turn around and say, well, I'm not leaving my house. I put money into this house too. I bought this furniture. This is I shouldn't have to. Okay, so now you're letting the id. You're letting the id decide for you. That's irrational. That makes no sense. To stay in a circumstance that is uncomfortable, that is hurtful, life-threatening, at best, at worst. But you tell yourself, I'm not going. It's my house too. I'm staying. You have to look at how you condition yourself, because you begin to condition yourself. Remember, we talked about the so-called normalcy of what's acceptable in our society, right? But sometimes to avoid negative consequences, right? That ego has to be looking at the situation and saying, hey, no, that's not going to be good. But remember, the id operates without care for consequences. Doesn't care. The ego considers social realities and norms, etiquette, and rules in deciding how to behave. I want you to understand it. It considers, the ego considers. It's considerate. The id is inconsiderate. Remember? These are opposites here. The id is inconsiderate, the ego is considerate. It takes into the equation what is acceptable. Is it acceptable for me to walk into this wedding with my hat turned around backwards, my pants hanging off my behind? Right? With that old hip-hop street swagger. Is that appropriate etiquette? Why is it not? In some venues it is. In some venues it's not. The id says, listen, I'm going to do what I want to do. The ego says, well, hold up, there's a proper etiquette here. This behavior is not acceptable to this group. Therefore, conducting yourself in that manner will find you jumped, beat down, thrown out. Is that what you want? That's what the ego asks. The ego asks, is that what you want? The id says, I don't care. I'm going in like this anyway. They like it or not. The ego reminds you, this ain't going to be good. The id says, I don't care about the consequences. And you know, as simple as that seems, it's very complicated within itself. It is. Because then when you go in there with this so-called idea of normalcy, dressed the way you are, you look at others around you that who are not dressed as such, who are dressed like the person that I just described, and you look at them and say, well, what the hell were you thinking about coming to a wedding dressed like that? What's wrong with that thinking? That may be all I have. And not all I have as far as clothing, that may be all I have as a person. That may be all that I have been given. That may be all that I have been given. And again, it's a matter of being objective as opposed to subjective. The id has no connection with whatsoever. It doesn't have the ability to be objective. I mean, it just doesn't. Everything is subjective, right? Like the id, the ego seeks pleasure, like, i.e. tension reduction, and avoids pain. But unlike the id, the ego is concerned with devising a realistic strategy to obtain pleasure. Hold on now. We can listen. We don't have to do it this way, right? Instead of picking up the phone and making a booty call because you're in your feelings, how about this? Why don't we go to the mall and see what new socks they have at the store that you go into? Because you like them socks, and they be getting some different prints in there. Well, I'm a sock person. For those of y'all who don't know, I'm a sock person. I love printed socks. I love all the different, the loud ones, just super neon yellow with stripe. I'm a sock person. So now the ego is saying, hey, hold up. We can get some pleasure out of this. Don't have to go through this old painful thing that we went through before. The last time we did that, you remember the last time we did that, you wind up losing a really good one. Right? You wind up, you didn't speak for a whole 6 months. Right? And you finally got it back. Right? So let's not repeat that again. Go to the mall, let's see what, and listen, even if you don't find some new ones in there, I'm sure you'll find something in the mall. Listen, you might even wind up getting one of them old sweet pretzels from that auntie's place, whatever her name is, and and it takes you away from the situation. Then you can revisit it. After you've gotten some pleasure, now you can revisit it. So in essence, it's what it's saying is that it's a tension reduction, right? That's what the ego is looking for. The id is always tense when it don't get what it wants, and that's how people stay wound up all the time. They're always in a chaotic state. And there's a theory called chaos theory, and I'll go into that in another show. But there's actually a theory, right, which has to do with the id. Excuse me. So the ego wants to reduce pain, suffering, discomfort, all that. That's what the ego is seeking to do. The ego is seeking to do that. Hey, listen, no, come on, let's just go ahead and get out. Don't wallow in it. Let's just go ahead and get out and do something else. Because it's concerned with devising a realistic strategy to obtain pleasure. So the tension reducer is to go to the mall. We're going to reduce some tension. Let's get out of our head for a minute. Let's kind of focus on something else, because when you're in the car, you got to focus on driving. You got to be, offensively and defensively, focused. So that's taking your mind off of the circumstance. You're turning the music on. You're turning the air on. The air is cooling you down. I say cooling you down because I'm in Florida, so I'm always being cooled down. We had a couple of cool downs in here, but it's mostly hot, so I got the air on. But you're focusing on different things other than the event that just happened. Right? You're focusing on different things. Right? So you take that drive and you're seeing sights along the way, and your mind is now being diverted. But what's actually happening is you're beginning to de-escalate from the situation. Then you get into the mall, and probably for some of us, the tension goes back up because you got all these people. I don't like being around a whole bunch of people, that close to me. I'll do lectures, workshops, and all those things, but I'm not really a close kind of person, believe it or not. So sometimes that can be a little irritating for me, right? But anyway, so I make it to the store, I go and I look at the socks, and I'm having fun looking at socks. Oh, these are nice, but I'm also peripherally scanning the rest of the store for other things. Something might be on sale. So even if I don't make a purchase, right, my tension has been reduced. Now I have the ability to look at a realistic way of working this out, right? Of working this whole thing out, and I'm looking at it and saying, okay, now we can go about it this way. So all that interruption is really good. It's a really good thing, right? And sometimes, though, you know, listen, even for myself, we don't always walk away from situations, right? We don't always walk away. Sometimes you just can't physically walk away if you're in the house. You know, sometimes you just feel like, okay, I have to deal with this now. And when you're in the same environment, right, you know, sometimes you can separate yourself from one another, but if you don't do something to divert that thinking, television doesn't always do it. Television doesn't do it for me. Sometimes music will be the best thing for me, because television will influence the thinking of the circumstance. Certain music will influence the circumstance. So sometimes I'll put on soundscapes, because there's no conversation, there's nothing to promote the thought other than serenity. Because, you know, when you think about, you know, rivers and streams, I'm a fisherman, I like the outdoors, I like camping, all those kind of things. So when I look at all those things for me divert me from the negativity. If I start listening to R&B soul jams, I'm just going to start hearing love songs, I'm going to get pissed. Probably somewhere along the line, or I'm going to get tearful, I'm going to get emotional. So sometimes you have to know what to use to divert from certain things. So if you're in the house, like, can you just get your headphones and put your headphones on and listen to some seascapes, right? Sometimes even, like, you know, like I have the Quran on my iPad, and I can listen to that. But one of the things that I learned from a therapist many years ago, like, I suffer with anxiety and depression also, and in order to deal with my anxiety, sometimes I go through nights of insomnia. And she was telling me, like, not to get up. Don't get up and go turn the television on. Don't listen to something that has sensible verbiage. She told me to use nonsense syllables. So I would say things to myself that don't make sense. I would just come up with something that doesn't have any kind of sensibleness to it. So I use nonsense things such as ooga booga. It means nothing, right? You know, it means nothing, and I just use that, and it keeps me, because it makes no sense. I can't conceptualize anything in my head, which allows me to just focus on the nonsense. I forgot what she called them, but it doesn't make sense. And you just repeat that over and over and over and over again, and because it makes no sense, you can't conceptualize a thought. You can't put together a thought. So when you eliminate the stream of thoughts, right, by using that, then you can kind of fall back to sleep, and it puts me back to sleep, right? It puts me right back to sleep. So it's like different thought stopping techniques that I've used throughout the years to keep me, you know, back, or get me on track to where it is that I need to be. So it takes some work, but this is the role of the ego. The ego has no concept of right or wrong. I want you to understand this. Now, that goes to the superego, because the superego starts talking about morality. This is just a matter of putting into balance the balance of the self, right? Because as it said in the beginning of the article, the id of the ego is the other part of the id that is the management part. It's the management part of self. But this is the part that can be developed because of its relationship to the external world, to the external self. The id has no connection with the external world, has no care, concern whatsoever about any of that. It's more concerned with me. Me. That's all the id is about. The ego, however, is concerned with the management of that self, because it takes the self out of control when it doesn't manage. So It doesn't determine whether this is right or whether this is wrong. It's a matter of rational. It's the rational aspect, right? So right or wrong is determined by morality, and that's the superego, and we haven't gotten there yet. So the ego has no concept of right or wrong. Something is good simply if it achieves its end of satisfying without causing harm to itself or to the id. You got me? So it's not a matter of right or wrong. It's a matter of, I don't have to feel this way. I can do something about it. Now do something about it. That's the free will aspect of the person. That's the I. The id is more of an it. So when you say use the term it in terms of a human being, right? That's what a human being is. A human being is an it because there's no consciousness. You follow what I'm saying? It. So it's id, but it's referred to by Freud as the it. That means that you're a human being, but you are not a person without the ego and the superego, because you are just an existing being that has a primitive and instinctive way of dealing with life. So your superiority, being above all of God's creations, having the ability to think, right, is in its raw nature, being primitive and instinctual, right, instinctive in its being, in its doing, right, can be dangerous. Can be dangerous. Hence the reason why the ego and the superegos are there as well. Hence the reason why God in his infinite wisdom gave Adam Eve. Because that's also the other aspect of the development of self. That ego and that superego aspect. That's where the woman comes into play for the man. Because obviously, as God watched Adam alone in the world, there were things that he saw in Adam's creation that were missing, that were significant to Adam's growth and development as a human being. As a human being. Right? So the relationship is very important. Right? Because the way you become conscious of things is through interacting with the external world. Right? When you are in an unconscious condition, the world doesn't matter. Nothing matters. That's why, again, the person appears to be selfish, because their id is running their lives. Okay? So, often the ego is weak relative to the headstrong id. So again, it goes back to, I'll finish the sentence first. Often the ego is weak relative to the headstrong id. And the best ego can do is stay on, pointing the id in the right direction and claiming some credit at the end as if the action were its own. Right? So it's like a matter of, like you can tell your child over and over again that hanging around with little boo-boo is not going to be good. It's not going to have a good outcome. Little boo-boo is, he's trouble, he's bad news, he does this, he does that, but the child sees little boo-boo from another perspective. right? So sometimes you have to surrender. And you have to be willing to make that sacrifice. That your child is going to be in harm's way with little boo-boo. But as much as you have fought, argued, screamed, chastised, punished, disciplined, your child, little boo-boo, is still their partner. That's my homie. And when it happens, the only thing you can do is to be there. And reminding your child that, well, I told you so, ain't going to help at all. It's the same thing with the id and the ego. Sometimes the ego just surrenders because it's not as strong. It's not as strong as the id. The id is the core of self. It's not as strong as, never will be. That's when it has its, why it has its supporting cast, the superego, which we're going to talk about, but we just haven't gotten there yet. Okay? So, remember, no concept of right or wrong. It's just a matter of, I don't want to feel like this. So you don't have to feel like this if you do it this way. That's all it's telling the id. You don't have to feel that way. Feeling that way is a choice. You have some options. You can sit here and be in pain. You can sit here and suffer. Or you can go this way. It's up to you. And because the id is so strong, so powerful, because it's the self. Right? Sometimes ego just has to fall back. And this is like I said with the analogy with the child, sometimes you just have to fall back and let the cards fall where they may. And when the pain comes, ego steps up. The parent steps up. Hey, I'm there. That's all it is. It's the same exact thing. It's the same exact thing. The ego acts as the parent to the id. Remember, because the id is infantile, it's childish, it's childlike, it's self-centered, it's all about me. The ego is the parent. I'll be there for you. The safety net, I'll be there for you. Always in the id's ear. Listen, this ain't gonna be good. And the id keeps saying, like the child, I got this. I got this. Right? So, it continues to point the id in the right direction. Like, hey, listen, the pain can stop. We can stop the pain. You can get up off the floor. Just stand up. Let it go. You can get out of the fetal position. You can go get your job back. All you got to do is just let this thing go. Get up. You got a choice. And you know, you can laugh about it, but this is what a human being, every human being goes through this every waking moment of their lives. And if you think you don't, then you don't know your id. And then going back to what I continue to say about people keep using the term egotistical, it says it right here. Often the ego is weak relative to the headstrong id. It says it. The ego is weak relative to the headstrong id. That's when a person is being egotistical. The ego doesn't have the capacity. Doesn't have the capacity to be like the id. And when a person is being egotistical, what are they being? Egotistical, so-called. What are they being? Headstrong. They're being about themselves. It's about me. It's about my way. It's about me first, my satisfaction. Doesn't that sound like the id? So how is a person being egotistical? So stop using the term. That's another one of those terms, right, that we've got to stop using because it's being used wrong. There's no such thing as egotistical. In the capacity that's being used. Because because you can be egotistical. But egotistical would mean what? That you're focused on not being harmful. to others or self. Not based on right or wrong, based on, listen, you don't have to do that because you're going to have consequences as a result of doing that, and I don't want to have those consequences. You know, I want to make sure that we continue to feel good, but not in spite of, not in, you know, at the risk of. No. And that's not right or wrong. You conceptualize it in your brain right now and say that it is. That's an intellectual response to something that you have no capacity of thinking. You can't think the id. You can't. You don't have the capacity. None of us have the capacity to think like the id. You don't. You can see it play out and say that's what it is, but you don't have the capacity to intellectualize the id away because the id controls the thinking. Just saying. Alright, before you start going into this whole intellectual response, just want you to look at what it is that's being said here. And I'll always direct you to the site. So I'm at the site simplypsychology.org. Simplypsychology.org. Right? But do the research yourself. Do the research on Freud. On the id, the ego, and the superego. Right? Because that's the three components to the person. There's the self, the it, the id, the it. There's the ego, the I. Right? That's who I am. Right? And then there's the ego. This is why I am who I am. This is my belief. This is my foundation of living. But we haven't gotten there yet. So, so Freud made the analogy of the id. Let me kind of scroll this up. Freud made the analogy of the id being a horse, while the ego is the rider. The ego is like a man on horseback who has to hold in check the superior strength of the horse. And that's a great analogy. If you've ever ridden a horse, you will know the term that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink, is a fact. I tried it. I got thrown off a horse before because of doing that. He wasn't going to the lake. I kept trying to ride him to the lake. He wasn't going to the lake. And I remember being on him on another day. Something scared him. I said, "Whoa!" I kicked in his ribs. I pulled back on the reins, everything. Didn't stop him from jetting. I don't know what spooked him that morning, but he ran, and he must have ran probably for every bit of 2-3 blocks through the woods. And I felt like, you know, I was riding through the woods and I had stuff slapping me and hitting me, and he kept on running until he was tired of running. And when he stopped, I couldn't even get him to just turn around and go back. He wouldn't move. He wouldn't move. But that's what it's like when you look at how powerful and massive a horse is, and you get on it, and it sits there, and it sits there. He ain't going nowhere. So it means before you even mount that horse, you need to talk to him or her, rub their face. They like for you to rub them on the bridge of the nose, and they like that, right? Pat them, talk to them real nice, and then you mount the horse. But realize the power that you have in your hands, because it'll go with you. But when it gets spooked, or when it just don't feel like it ain't going there, it ain't going. And you need to understand those things. So I think that's a good analogy, Freud. And so, if the ego fails in its attempt to use the reality principle, and anxiety is experienced, and unconscious defense mechanisms are employed to help ward off unpleasant feelings, i.e. anxiety, or make good things feel better for the individual. So again, we reread that. If the ego fails in its attempt to use the reality principle, so if today is the day that the id just ain't having it, right, and you begin to get anxiety, because again, I suffer with anxiety and depression, right? So the anxiety is coming as a result of a couple of things that is happening. The id is not getting what it wants. And the id becomes tense. It makes the person tense. It creates irritation. right? And this is why you have to understand, when people get a diagnosis of anxiety, it doesn't have to be anything going on outside, externally. Externally, nothing has to be going on. And it just kicks in. I get that surge of energy, and it makes me feel uncomfortable. And I ride it out. You know, but if the ego fails in trying to get the id to look at things from a rational perspective, what begins to happen is you get anxious. Right? Because it's not, the id is not being rational right now. The id is doing what it wants to do. It's taking control. It's not allowing the ego to reduce the tension. You know, to reduce that uncomfortable feeling. It's not allowing the ego to do that. So when the ego falls back, then the id does what it does, and then the tensions mount. And that anxiety kicks in. Right? And you get that feeling. I can't explain, like sometimes my anxiety is so intense that I feel I get like an uncomfortableness right up in here. Right? My heart, I get my heart starts palpitating. And you know, and I start, then the thinking kicks in, and you start thinking things. And, you know, all kinds of things. When your anxiety is like that. Like well, first thing you think is I want it to stop, which just will go away. You know, but there are other things that come along with that. But also it's a matter of, you know, just your unconscious defense mechanisms start kicking in for you, and you start the process within whatever happens. You know, I start deep breathing, but it's something else that begins to happen unconsciously, you know, with the id and the ego and the superego. Again, the superego, we haven't gotten there yet, but we'll talk about it. They just kick in. That the naturalness, the natural unconscious defenses. There's things that you can do consciously to decrease the anxiety, to decrease, you know, that feeling, that uncomfortable feeling. Right? There's external things that you can gravitate towards, you know, as I talked about earlier. But there's other things that take place unbeknownst to you, to ward off unpleasant feelings, to be able to reduce that anxiety, or make good things feel better, right? Because you may be doing something that that's rational, excuse me, that you should be doing, but then it's a matter of the id doesn't like it. And because the id doesn't like something, it tries to make you feel uncomfortable. It tries to keep you from having a good time. Because you're doing something that you have compromised, you know, on. You've postponed, you know, what it is that you want. The ego has postponed what the id wants in order to accommodate a situation, to have a better outcome. So it won't be a feeling of unpleasantness, nor will it be harmful towards the other person. Right? The ego engages in secondary process thinking, which is rational, realistic, and orientated towards problem solving. The id doesn't care about problem solving. It doesn't care about problem solving. That's the role of the ego. The ego wants to problem solve. The ego doesn't want this to continue. So what the ego does is the ego says, "Hey, listen, can we talk about this for a minute? Just want to make sure, because I just want to make sure, because right now this is not good." The id is saying, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. I said what I said, I did what I did, and that's it. What do you argue? What's the argument about? There is no argument. I didn't do anything wrong. That's what I think. That's what I feel. That's what I'm doing. The ego and the others, in a sense, is saying, well, wait a minute, listen. But is that making the situation better? The id is saying, well, what better? For who? For them? I don't care about it being better for them. It's not better for me. That's what the id is saying. It's better for me that we don't have a discussion. There's nothing to talk about. This is what I want. I don't want to be bothered with this. I don't want this. I don't want that. What is the issue here? Why are you making such an issue with it? And the ego says, well, it's not that I'm making an issue with it. It's that the outcome to this is not, it's going to be harmful to you in the end, because you're not going to have that person. You're going to lose this person. You're going to lose this relationship if you continue to look at it from the perspective that you are. Again, not right or wrong. The ego wants to avoid pain and suffering, its own and that upon others. Right? Because if I'm harmful towards my partner, then what does that mean? Right? If I'm being harmful, that means, and I'm going to suffer in the end too. I'm going to suffer in the end too. It's going to be some cold nights. Right? Even in the summer. Because I'm not looking at things from a rational perspective, a realistic perspective. And that's the role of the ego. That's the role of the ego. The role of the id is like, it doesn't even matter. Not at all. If a plan of action does not work, then it is thought through again until a solution is found. And that's the kind of person that I am. Right? That's the kind of person that I am. I'm always seeking to resolve things because I don't like not feeling good. I like feeling good. You know, I like feeling good. I like having a serene life. I like having an environment of solitude and peace and serenity in my home. I don't like the negative feelings. I don't know. None of us like it. Right? None of us like it. Even those of us who are allowing their id to run their lives, they don't like being there. They just haven't allowed their egos to manage their lives. That means that their ego hasn't been nurtured. They're more nurturing of their id than their ego. This is known as reality testing and enables the person to control their impulses and demonstrate self-control via mastery of the ego. And again, I feel like for me, at 56 years old, I've done quite well with mastering my ego. With mastering my ego. For me, it's a matter of finding a balance, and this is my goal for this year. For me, it's a matter of finding the balance with the compromising and postponing aspect of the ego. That's what my focus is on. My wife and I were having a discussion the other day, and I forgot what we were talking about, but I was talking to her. I think we were actually looking towards the incoming year, and I was talking about how, you know, I do so many things. Like I'm a graphic artist. You know, I'm a pen and ink artist. I just got some prints. I have one of my prints behind me. It's the first poster I got of my prints. The first poster, y'all, that I've gotten of my prints. And you know, the one behind me is a 24 by 36. But some of my drawings are like, you know, 18 by 22. Some may be 22 by such and such. But I've never gotten them done on prints, right? So I have my first print, this one behind me, and I got another one, and I'm working on another drawing that is kind of looks like it's probably about 36, 37 by 40 something. It's a pretty big one. So I'm working on that one, and these pieces of artwork take months for me to do. If I worked on them every day, it would reduce the time, but I never know what it's going to be. I just draw whenever I'm in the mood. I draw, and whatever comes to mind, I draw. And whatever it is that I started on, even if it was a particular subject on that piece of work, I just add to it based on where I am at that time. But you know, I do the videos. I'm self-taught in shooting videos and editing them. I got the software, and I just started learning how to manipulate it. I'm a writer, so I've done some freelance writing for some online media papers. I've done the blogging for a while. I set up my own website, you know, and designed the website myself and put it all together myself. I'm still working on this whole studio setup thing. I just got my lighting umbrella so I can use a natural light So I'm learning all these things along the way. I'm improving things all the way. What else? I was a DJ for years. I was a sous chef for 10 years. I'm a clinician. I'm a certified clinician, a certified addictions professional. What else? But it's, all these things I do. So for me as a person, I need to, I look back on my life, and I looked at how I've been married to somebody since I was 24 years old. I'm 56 now, and how those marriages ended, and how much of my life I put on hold, not doing the things that I enjoy doing and fulfilling those things, because I allowed my ego to overcompromise, to over postpone in situations when I needed to make a different decision, to not yield, right? To not compromise, to not postpone in addressing, in dealing with certain things, right? So each one of the marriages pretty much had taken, by my own decision making, had taken up the space in my path, and it made my path, it's like cholesterol. How cholesterol, you can have a 1-inch artery, but then cholesterol begins to line the walls of that artery, so it goes from a 1-inch to a 1/2 inch. And for my life throughout the years, from 24 to date, what wound up happening is I went from a 1-inch artery to a 1/4-inch artery. And I was pushing through, I was trudging through, but what was happening was all those things externally had occupied, my path. And how my focus this year, 2017, is to scrape down the walls and, widen my path and get that flow going and get back to where I was, where I have been, right? And I mean, when I have been, like traveling in my flow, because that's what makes me happy. That's what keeps my life pleasurable. That's what keeps the tension off of me. That's what keeps that stress off of me. That's what keeps my id from running my life. That's what keeps that id from running my life. When the id starts running your life, the id takes away the pleasurable things that you need to be doing. It does what it wants to do. It doesn't do what it needs to do. And when you do more of what you want to do, it becomes conditioning. That's all you focus on, is wanting what you want, instead of looking at the things that you need in your life. You need to make your prayers 5 times a day. You need to study, your Quran. You need whatever it is that you need to do. You need to be doing it, and the id takes that away. The id allows you to see. But the id, being so powerful and strong as it is, often overwhelms the ego and blinds you. It clouds your vision and doesn't allow you to see the things that you need to do, that you must do. So that's what when I look at my life and I look at where I'm moving towards this year. And when I mean moving, I mean I'm moving. I'm not jogging. I'm not jogging. I'm moving. I'm running at 8.6. If you ever been 8.6 on a treadmill, that's my sprint. 8.6 on a treadmill. Right? I can do about a 1/4 mile sprint at 8.6. So right now I'm not doing a sprint. I'm doing a cross country run at 8.6, because there's so many things that I've not completed that I have on the burners. I have my own nonprofit. I established that on my own. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not saying that well, listen, I don't even have to justify it. If you take it if I'm saying it in a manner that's braggart, that's fine. But listen, God blessed me. God bestowed these things upon me. These talents, these abilities, these skills, and I need to put them to use. I need to not be delayed in doing that, because that's important. It's important. It's important that we nurture ourselves. It's important that we nurture our children's self, right? The ego aspect of the self, right? That we teach our children, you know, to not be impulsive on everything, to look at things from a different perspective. The right or wrong aspect of the person we'll talk about next week when we talk about the super ego, but we ain't got there yet today. So right now we're just wrapping up on the ego. So last week we talked about the id. This week we talked about the ego, right? These are all, this is me, this is who I am. And we really have to understand that. We have to understand that. As a human being, this is who you are. The id is the self. And this is where we get selfish from. There's no such thing as egotistical in the sense it's being used. If you call a person egotistical, that means you're saying that person is reality based in their thinking. They're reality based in their thinking. Right? And that's what we have to look at. That this person is not being harmful in their approach. They're not being selfish in what it is. They're not being uncompromising in what it is that they're saying and doing. That's not an egotistical person. That's an id-tistical person. And I want everybody to really understand this. Because until we come to understand ourselves, we can't change the world. The world's never going to change. Because there's such a misalignment with the will of God. And I'm not saying it from a religious perspective, I'm saying it to you, period. That there's such a misalignment, that the struggle that happens within is more treacherous and more devastating. Right? Consequentially, to the human being, because of what goes on within itself. Because of what goes on within itself. And we have to see this. We have to understand this. If we're going to have any kind of change in our lives, we have to understand what's going on. And we have to understand that the war is within oneself. More than anything. When you look at television, you look at protests, you look at all these different things that are going on in the world, right? This is the id. This is evidence of the id running one's life. That's all you see. The chaos. And chaos is a theory. And in one of the shows, I'll talk about chaos theory. Maybe I'll bring it up next week when I go into the superego, and I'll just I'll do a summary of chaos theory in relationship to the id and the superego, just to tie it all in together. But listen, Happy New Year, happier New Year. Make this the happiest year of your life, right? Make this the happiest day of your life, right? You know, funny, not funny, but like ha funny. But do you realize that up to the end of the year, we were losing so many artists? Do you know Gilligan from Gilligan's Island died yesterday. Somebody else died yesterday. We've lost so many people in 2016. We've seen a lot of people in 2016, right? That's significant of something. But we saw a lot of people. Zsa Zsa Gabor, I thought she was going to live forever, and she darn near did, 99 years old. Right? But we lost so many people in 2016. Don't never think for a minute that you're going to see tomorrow.